On today's show, it's Monday, August 19th, and it's finally time to talk about the first free agent the Cavs have signed all summer. We'll talk JT Thor plus break down a Bleacher Report trade that involved Georges Niang, why it could or couldn't happen, all that and more on today's Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. You can find the show everywhere you get podcasts, Spotify, Apple, anywhere else. Be sure to drop us a 5-star review. Help us grow the show. Also, check us out on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, that's great. Hit that like button for me. Click the thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button as well and the notification bell so you know when the latest Locked On Cavs content is coming your way. Today's show, of course, is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Of course, we are a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hi again, everybody. I'm Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like 92.3 The Fan, Cleveland Magazine, and a number of other stops along the way. Want to talk about a number of different things today. As I mentioned in the cold open, it's Monday, August 19th. Welcome to a fresh week of Locked On Cavs. Got a lot of stuff lined up for you this week. Cannot wait to get into it. 2, we get to talk about a free agent signing. The Cavs have reportedly agreed to terms with JT Thor, a former second-round draft pick out of Auburn, has played 3 years in the NBA with the Charlotte Hornets on a 2-way contract. We'll talk about that since it's a 2-way deal in segment number 2 today. Also, we're going to go over some of the takes you guys had about the Cavs schedule that came out late last week that we touched upon in Friday's episode. But I wanted to start today's show with a fake trade that Bleacher Report put out last week. It was one that I put out on Twitter, and again, you can find me on Twitter at RealDCunningham if you're not following me there. It's one that I put out there that Bleacher Report, sent out to everybody's phone that has the Bleacher Report app, and of course, it's something that creates a ton of conversation. We're having that conversation right now. But it was 5 trades, essentially, that Bleacher Report wants to see. One of those trades involved the Cavs, and that deal, as I pull it up here, was Georges Niang to Brooklyn, along with a second-round pick in this upcoming draft that is via the Milwaukee Bucks, and then the Cavs' own second-round pick in 2027, 2028, and 2029. In exchange for all that, the Cavs would get back Dorian Finney-Smith. This is something, obviously, we've talked about quite a bit. We've talked about Dorian Finney-Smith as a potential member of the Cavs for a good chunk of this summer, as someone who, he could be a fit in Cleveland. I think that this is a trade that makes some sense. I think that this price is a little hefty, though, and that's where I want to start with this discussion. I think that this price is a little hefty because four second-round picks, and I understand that the value of second-round picks are not always equal. Like, I think it was this past trade deadline, Saddiq Bey went to Atlanta for 5 second-round picks, or maybe it was 2 years ago, whatever. So the value of second-round picks, I think, fluctuates pretty greatly. And I do think that there are a lot of people in this fan base that think getting off of Georges Niang's contract is a really smart thing for the Cavs to do. So maybe 1 or 2 of those second-round picks is something that Cavs fans view as, hey, this is the cost of getting off of what we perceive to be a bad contract. So I understand that aspect of it. I like Dorian Finney-Smith, the player. I think he is a good player. I don't think things have gone for him as well in Brooklyn because he is somebody that needs to be around other people that can create for him. He's not a guy, I don't think at least, that's very good at creating for himself. He is someone that I think is best utilized when he's playing with someone else that is ball dominant. He can be a catch and shoot guy. I know his 3-point percentage while he's with the Nets has dipped significantly from when he was with Dallas. Personally, I attribute some of that, maybe not all of it, as he is somebody that obviously is aging. He's not a young player anymore. I attribute some of that, though, to when he was in Dallas, he played alongside Luka Doncic. And in that time, he got a lot of open shots that were created by Luka Doncic. And then he gets sent to Brooklyn as part of the package that got Kyrie Irving to the Dallas Mavericks a couple years ago. And what's left in Brooklyn? Not a ton. He's playing with Ben Simmons, who is seemingly never actually on the floor. So that's not someone that's creating him shots. Spencer Dinwiddie's been there at times. There's Mikal Bridges is not someone that, I think he's an awesome player, obviously, and no longer in Brooklyn, but when he was in Brooklyn, I just don't think that he is someone that you want creating everybody's shot. So I do think that's part of the reason why Dorian Finney-Smith's production has slipped with the Nets. If this trade were to happen, I think it would be fair to expect a better version of Dorian Finney-Smith than what the Brooklyn Nets have gotten, because I think that as a basketball player, he can sort of be a product of his environment, if that makes sense. Where if he is surrounded by pieces and parts that can do a lot of that heavy lifting and he can just kind of fit in along the outside, he can be a good basketball player. But he has to be a good fit. He has to be with someone that can create really good shots. Well, what do the Cavs have? The Cavs have a couple of guys in Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, and even Evan Mobley to some extent, that can create really good shots for others. So I do think that if this trade were to come to fruition, I'm not saying that it will, I'm not even saying that it should, because I do want to dive into some of the negatives coming up here. But that if this trade were to actually happen, I think the Cavs would get more out of Dorian Finney-Smith than the Brooklyn Nets have gotten out of Dorian Finney-Smith. Now, the thing as I pull this back up again, if you're watching on YouTube and you can see exactly just what everything is here as far as the trade goes, what Dorian Finney-Smith is making. Obviously, Georges Niang, the contract is not viewed as a great one by some people. Dorian Finney-Smith's making over $14 million. And this trade works, but what this trade does is it puts the Cavs, if this were to happen again, this puts the Cavs pretty close to the luxury tax. As I record this right now, the Cavs are $11 million away from the luxury tax line. The Cavs are not a cheap organization. The Cavs, when the time comes, have shown they're willing to pay that tax. That's not an issue there. They're not an organization like, say, the Pelicans, who just refuse to pay the luxury tax. That's not who the Cavs are. That's not who Dan Gilbert is as the primary owner of this basketball team. But I don't think it makes sense for this organization to start the clock on the luxury tax this year. Because when you take a look at what the future of the cap situation is going to be for the Cavs, where they've got Donovan Mitchell, who's going to get more expensive. Evan Mobley obviously signed a max contract extension this summer. That doesn't affect this year at all, but the year after that, he's going to be a much more expensive player. In a couple of years, Jarrett Allen's contract is going to go up. He will be more expensive when he jumps from $20 million to $28 million in a couple of seasons. When you add all of those things together, and then, they've got 5 players under contract. The first year Jarrett Allen's extension kicks in, the Cavs have 5 players under contract. It's the core 4 and Max Strus. And Jalen Tyson has a club option too, so you might as well include him. But that is already over the cap. It's hard for me to envision that group not being in the tax. So with that, the Cavs want to avoid going into the tax as long as they can. If I had to guess, they won't be in the tax this year. They'll be in the tax next year. So this trade of Georges Niang and second-round picks for Dorian Finney-Smith doesn't put the Cavs in the tax. It does not. They're $4.5 million under the tax. That's with 12 guys on the roster. You have to have at least 14 guys on the roster. Now, there are loopholes where you can have 13 for like 2 weeks and then you have to sign a 14th player. But this is without a complete roster, and it's without Isaac Okoro. If this trade were to happen, I think it's really difficult to see how Isaac Okoro is back, because Isaac Okoro could theoretically say, you know what, I'm going to accept that qualifying offer, and then boom, the Cavs are in the tax. That's how that goes. So that is something I do think that they would want to avoid. I don't think that this organization wants to be in the tax this year specifically. It's not that they're not willing to pay the tax. I think they very much are. I think it's shown that in the past. But I think for this team, given what the future looks like, I don't think it makes sense for them to be a tax team. I think it makes sense for them to wait a year and then go into the tax. This time next year, we should be talking about a team that should be a tax team, should be a first apron team. That is what the Cavs should be. They're not there right now. I think if they made this trade, it puts them there a year early, and then that could have some financial consequences down the line. The Cavs aren't cheap, but you don't want to start the repeater clock earlier than you have to. And as things right now, they're $11 million under the tax. I think keeping it, and that's before, again, they still have to fill out the rest of the roster. They still have to figure out Isaac Okoro. They can do those things and make some moves elsewhere and still keep themselves under the tax. But if they were to make this trade, it's really difficult for me to envision what it would look like for them going under the tax. So yeah, 4 second-round picks and Georges Niang is probably a little bit higher than you would like to pay for Dorian Finney-Smith. But the real price here is that if you make this trade, Isaac Okoro is probably gone. And I think when you add the price you actually pay for DFS with Isaac Okoro probably going elsewhere, and maybe the Cavs get creative, maybe they make this trade because they have something else up their sleeves in terms of a sign-and trade with Okoro, and they can really maneuver it and make things look great at the end of the day. I don't know. I'm not privy to that. But just looking at this with the knowledge I have right now, I don't think it makes sense because I don't think you want to lose Isaac Okoro, and I don't think you want to be a tax team. So I think that if we had to say who says no to this deal, I actually think it's the Cavs. I think that the Cavs probably say no to this. I think the Nets would say yes, but I think that the Cavs probably say no to this deal. If we had to say who says no, I think the Cavs back away from this one. Well, the Cavs said yes to JT Thor grabbing a two-way slot this weekend. We're going to talk about that straight ahead on today's edition of Locked On Cavs. Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. When your schedule is packed with activities for your kids, maybe yourself, big work projects, and so much more, it's really easy to let your priorities slip. And you start to, fail on taking care of yourself at times. And, even when we know the things that make us happy, it can be hard to find time for those things that make us happy. And when you start to feel like that's the case, when you don't have time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy start to become more important than ever. You have to take care of yourself first and foremost, or you can't take care of anything else. And I think that's something that is really important. So whether you are struggling, whether you need someone to talk to, BetterHelp is the place to go. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. When life is moving as fast as it feels like it can be moving for me sometimes, maybe as it feels like it's moving for you, having the flexibility and having BetterHelp be convenient to your schedule is something that is massive when you really want to be in therapy to better yourself. So just fill out a brief questionnaire and you will get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. I think that's a really important thing because it can be difficult. Trust me, it can be difficult to find a therapist that you feel like is a good fit. So BetterHelp allowing you to switch therapists at any time for no additional charge, I think that's a really big deal. I think that's a really great thing that BetterHelp does. So never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for 10% off your first month. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. And if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting, well, I'm here to tell you to make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that's programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So over the weekend, news came out, I believe this was first reported by The Athletic, that the Cavs have agreed to terms with JT Thor on a two-way contract. So if you're unfamiliar with Thor, he is going into his fourth year in the NBA, which is a little bit of a rare thing, I do believe, for a player that's on a two-way contract. Thor has actually played, a ton of NBA games. He was a second-round pick by the Charlotte Hornets in the 2021 draft out of Auburn. I think he was 37th overall, so he's the 7th pick of the second round, which is, a decently high pick for a guy that finds himself on a two-way a few years down the line. But he's played 165 games in the NBA. And just a little bit about Thor, he's listed at 6'10". I think he's still a pretty raw prospect. Like, I do think that there is the outline there. Maybe it's kind of fuzzy at times, but I think there's the outline there of a pretty good NBA player. I don't know when he's going to be a pretty good NBA player, but I think he can be. And, for someone that has played 165 NBA games, he turns 22 next week. A week from today is JT Thor's 22nd birthday. So for his age and being on a two-way slot, he's got a lot of experience, but he's still young. He came into the league, obviously, at a very young age. If he's just turning 22 now and he's already played 3 seasons, you can do the math on how old he was when he entered the league. I think he was somebody that probably wasn't quite ready to be in the NBA. And I do think that being in this position is a great thing for the Cavs. And that's really where I want to go with this because, maybe JT Thor works out. Maybe he doesn't. I think I could say that about just about every guy that's on a two-way contract. I mean, take a look at a guy like Craig Porter Jr., who started last year as an undrafted guy, started out the year on a two-way. Now he's on a standard NBA contract, and I think has a very bright future. So there are guys like that, and then there are other two-way guys that don't ever make it in the NBA. That's sort of what this was built for. And I think that having Thor on this type of deal is a really great thing. I think it's awesome for him, and I think it's awesome for the Cavs that they're able to do this because you want to, in my opinion, with these slots, you want to take swings on guys that could be in the NBA one day, that they could, if everything works out, they're not going to be all-stars, and I know that there is a section of Cavs fans that have that belief about Emoni Bates, and I get it because of just how tantalizing his skill set is. I totally understand that. But most of these guys are not going to find themselves ever playing in an all-star game, nothing like that. Like, the best outcome for the vast majority of guys that are on two-way slots is if one day he becomes the 7th man on a winning team, that's a pretty good career for that guy. And I think that you can say that about JT Thor. I think you can say that about Emoni Bates, who the Cavs have still, and he's a restricted free agent on a two-way. And what I believe could be Luke Travers as the 3rd two-way slot. So let's talk about that too. So right now, what I think that this move does is I would now be surprised if Pete Nance is back on another two-way with the Cavs. I think that we'll probably see him in training camp with Cleveland on an Exhibit 10, and then I think it makes a lot of sense for him to be with the Cleveland Charge again this year. I think that these 3 two-way slots, we know JT Thor. We know that's one of those. I think the other ones are probably going to be Emoni Bates and Luke Travers. And I think that is awesome. I think that is exactly what your two-way roster should look like, where JT Thor, I think there's the outline of an NBA player. I think Emoni Bates might have the highest upside. Now, I don't think that his floor is all that high too, but I think he has maybe the highest upside of anyone that's on a two-way contract in the NBA. Like, his skills are outstanding. I'm just not confident, and I don't think anyone's really confident that he's going to put it all together. I would love for him to. The Cavs would love for him to. Everyone would love for him to. And I think he's a year away from being a legitimate NBA player. So I think he still needs some more time in the G League with the Charge. But I don't see many guys that are on two-way deals that have more upside than Bates does. And then the 3rd spot, I would expect to go to Travers, who we know he has gotten out of his contract down under, where Melbourne United said, you know what, Luke Travers wants to be in the NBA. We are going to release him from his contract. We are going to allow him to go pursue opportunities in the NBA. He talked about it during the pre-Summer League media availability that he took part in at Cleveland Clinic Courts, that he thinks he can be an NBA role player. And being on a two-way is a great proving ground because it gives him the opportunity when he's with the big club to have that chance. It also, I think, gives him the chance when he's in the G League to play a style of basketball that's closer to the NBA than what he's been playing in the NBL. And I think that allows him to grow and better his game. And then maybe a year from now, we're talking about him. Maybe we're talking about all 3 of these guys in a year from now as guys that deserve to be on standard contracts, whether it's with the Cavs or whether it's with someone else. So I do think that JT Thor is the perfect kind of player for a two-way. If it doesn't work out, these types of signings, these deals, there's no risk involved in them. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. It's not a big deal, especially when, and you can't say this about Bates and Travers because those are guys that the Cavs drafted in the second round, but JT Thor, they've not invested anything in. So if it doesn't work out, it's not like they spent a pick on him. It's a great swing to take. I think it's really, really smart moves by the Cavs front office. It might not work out. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay. But if it does work out, I think all three of the guys that I would expect for them to have on two-way deals, I think all three of them, if they work out, could be really, really good for the Cavs. So I love the move. Like I said, JT Thor is the exact type of guy the Cavs should be targeting with two-way deals. I think Emoni Bates is the exact type of guy they should be targeting. And obviously, he's restricted. So if he's going to be on a two-way, it's going to be in Cleveland. I think Luke Travers makes a ton of sense. So I'm excited to see if that's how it all plays out. But overall, I think JT Thor, even though he's still raw, he's got a ton of NBA experience as far as being a guy in a two-way goes. You're not going to find, many guys on these contracts that have played 160 plus games. That's just not how this works. But I think it's a really smart move for the Cavs. We'll see if it works. I don't know that it will, but I think it's a really smart move for them. So the schedule came out last week. I asked you guys at the end of Friday's video to give me your schedule takes. I've got one of them that I like that I want to discuss, so that's straight ahead right here on today's Locked On Cavs. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is, of course, an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball that makes getting tickets faster and so much easier. Prices on the Game Time app, well, they actually go down the closer you get to first pitch. It was a rough weekend for my Cleveland Guardians, but when they get back to Progressive Field, you're going to want to go watch and cheer them on as they continue to contend for not only the American League Central, but the best record in baseball. They got swept by the Brewers, going to put them behind them. They're going to go out in New York because they take on the Yankees this week in New York. They're going to go out. They're going to have a good series. Feel good about this. They're going to bounce back after a rough weekend up in Wisconsin. So when they get back home, you're going to want to go check them out at Progressive Field. How are you going to do that? Well, you're going to go on Game Time because they've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, plus the view from your seat. They've got the lowest price guarantee because Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Take the guesswork out of it. Buy your MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. And now for your second lesson, go on and enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast because there's no offseason in the NBA. We just got the schedule. There's tons to break down with it. Not only the Cavs talked about, if you missed Friday's show, go back and check that out. Going to talk a little bit more schedule coming up here in a second too. But all across the league. Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and as entertained as Locked On NBA. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So one of the things I asked for in Friday's episode of Locked On Cavs was your thoughts on the schedule release, sort of what you liked, what you didn't like, and this comment that I bring up, and this is from Ziv from the Land, says, I think the NBA should make the in-season tournament more interesting and competitive. What if the in-season tournament winner was guaranteed a spot in the play-in tournament? So, what I'm going to project onto this take is that this person means that they can do no worse than be in the play-in tournament. Like, if, say the Pacers would have won the in-season tournament last year. Say they would have beat the Lakers in the championship game. And they obviously, as we know, they finished the season outside of the play-in tournament. They were the number 6 seed. Winning that wouldn't pull them back in. That's where I think we should first start. But I do think this is something that, one, it does make sense to do. But I also don't know how frequently the winner of the in-season tournament is going to be a team that misses the playoffs. Because if you take a look right now, if you pull up the projected standings anywhere, Okay, you've got teams, and maybe in the Eastern Conference, the 10th team is going to be pretty bad. But for the most part, what teams do you see that could finish 11th or lower in either conference, in the West or the East, that could win the in-season tournament? And I know things get a little wonky, and I know that teams are not always playing their best basketball in October, November, December when this is all going on. So I totally get that. But I also don't think it's going to be the case. Now, and injuries changed this a ton, obviously. But if you look at a team like Detroit, who I don't think anyone watching or listening to this podcast right now expects the Detroit Pistons to make the playoffs this year. I definitely don't. I think they'll be better, but I don't think they'll make the playoffs. It is really difficult, or the play-in for that matter. It's really difficult for me to see them putting it together and winning a tournament like that, where they have to they have to win consecutive games. They have to win a lot of games to win this tournament. It's hard for me to see them being able to do that and then not being good enough to finish 10th. I just don't see how that's the case. I love the idea to add some significance to it, to where there's real incentive for the team. Maybe it is you get a top 6 seed. Or maybe it is if you're in the play-in, you move up. Or maybe it is, hey, no matter what happens, you get the tiebreaker. Doesn't matter if you were swept, if you're tied with a team that swept you in the regular season, the team that won the in-season tournament gets a tiebreaker over everybody. So if you are in 6th and you're tied with the team for 5th, you get the 5 seed because you have the tiebreaker. If you're in 7th and you're tied with 6th, congratulations, you missed the play-in tournament. You get to advance to the real playoffs because you hold the tiebreaker by winning the in-season tournament. So I think that might be something that is a little bit of a way to compromise, just because I think if you give a team that wins the in-season tournament an automatic berth in the play-in tournament at the end of the year, 90% of the time, the team that wins that in-season tournament is going to at least finish 10th, if not better, in the standings in their own conference. So I love the idea of giving a benefit, like a real actual benefit, to the team that wins the in-season tournament. I just don't know if that benefit specifically is enough. I don't know that that's a real benefit, because I don't know how often that would come into play. I don't know that that's something that we could frequently count on happening. But again, thank you for making today's edition of Locked On Cavs your first listen. Thank you to everyone that does listen every day. Going to plan on having a couple of guests this week, maybe some recurring ones, maybe some new ones. Also, very soon, going to start doing player previews, as we are just a little bit over a month away from Media Day at the end of September. September 30th will be Media Day across the NBA. So cannot wait to start talking real basketball. Can't wait for training camp to arrive and all that. But have a fun week here at Locked On Cavs. Hoping to bring you 4 or 5 episodes this week, just depending on how things shake out. So thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. Hit that like button, subscribe, notification bell, anything else that you need to do, help us grow the show. Make sure you're subscribed everywhere you get your podcast as well. And we will talk to you tomorrow for your first listen of Locked On Cavs.